Okay. Hey, everybody. I am Shailene, and I am so glad you're here today. If you were here from one of the previous two classes I did, be sure to let me know in the comments. So the last two classes that I taught for Michael's were both floral classes. We did a poppy and we did some rosebuds. But today we're going to do something that's a little bit more fall inspired. We're doing this pumpkin illustration. And I listened to the Charlie Brown October Halloween album this morning, so I feel really inspired. But for this class, I'll walk you through my process of how I composed and sketched this pumpkin out. So I'll walk you through that, and then we will use a fairly limited, simple palette. We're just going to use a few colors today, and we'll bring it to life and give it some dimension, kind of bring out some of those darker contrasts, and it's gonna be fun. And I think it'll be fairly simple. So if we want to switch to overhead view, I can talk through some supplies and then we can get started. So can you guys see okay? Hold on one moment. Let me click out of this so I can see my screen. Okay, so I am using Winsor & Newton's, this is 9x12 cold press watercolor paper. And I love using cold press. It has kind of this nice sort of, I don't know if you can tell in the video, but cold press has this really nice kind of rough texture to it. And kind of, I think they say it's a heavier tooth to the paper. I'm using, these are the Skechers Winsor & Newton. This is a 12-piece travel kit. In this class, I'm just going to be using cadmium yellow, sap green, and burnt sienna. And if you don't have these exact colors, if you have something different, that's totally fine. You can still make it work, just use green, yellow, and a nice orangey brown color that you have. For brushes, I'm using the size 6 and size 3 round brushes from Cotman Center. These are all synthetic brushes, so they're not made with animal hair, but I love these. The 6 especially holds a ton of water, and the 3 is great for doing more like the detailed work. So make sure you have 2 brushes. They don't have to be the same size, but make sure you're using a larger one and a smaller one. What else am I using? I'm using just a regular Click pencil today. I was using for my other classes the F pencil because that is my favorite for erasing after I'm finished painting. I'm able to erase the pencil markings the best with the F pencil, but it is harder to see over video. So I'm just going to use the 2. Besides that, I got, just some water here, a mixing palette, and a paper towel. So you might have gotten a sketch in your email. I think you did, of this pumpkin. Let me get this out of the way. So I'm going to walk you through my process of how I sketched this one. Let me go ahead and just move this over. So we're just focused on sketching right now. If you've already sketched it, that's awesome. If you haven't, totally fine. I'm going to walk you through it. So getting started here, I am just going to do kind of a nice oval shape. I like to do kind of these fine lines, kind of wispy, just to get my shape right before I commit to any hard dark lines.
Shailene, somebody asked, why not you, as you're sketching right here, why not use a watercolor pencil for this sketching process?
That's a great question. And actually, it's so funny. Every single time I teach these classes, people ask me about watercolor pencils. I have a couple of them, but for whatever reason, I don't necessarily use them that much. I find that I'm able to do finer detail with a nice penciled point. Maybe it's just because of the graphite. I'm not really sure. And also I was kind of just taught that way, but I actually do want to experiment more with the watercolor pencils because they're clearly very popular. So if you guys have watercolor pencils, I would love to see how that turns out. I think you could use just a nice yellow if you have one, but like I said, this one is great for me as far as control, and I'm able to erase if I need to as I'm sketching it out. So if you guys have your oval pumpkin shape ready, it doesn't have to be a perfect oval. Obviously pumpkins in real life are kind of squishy and all kinds of shapes, but let's see here. So let's draw this stem right here. So you'll notice it's not going to sit right on top of the pumpkin because we kind of have this kind of side view. So the perspective is just, we're looking kind of at the top of it. So I'm going to, you can see it's kind of like almost like a bell shape, or it kind of skirts at the bottom. So we want it to go up like this. I hope you guys can hear my little dog barking outside. She is very feisty. Okay, so once you have this shape here, I'm going to draw these little points kind of coming down. You can do just a few of them, 3, 4, 5. I'm actually going to do, I think I'll do 5. Okay.
And Shailene, somebody asked, what type of eraser did you just use before?
Did I grab the one out of frame? I can't remember.
Yes.
Or was I, okay, so this is a bloom eraser. I actually just started using these erasers. My great grandpa on my dad's side was he was like a sketch artist. Like he did a lot of stuff with charcoal. And I guess these were the ones he used. So I just started using them, and they are so amazing for erasing pencil markings so quickly. But you do get a lot of like debris everywhere. So just keep that in mind. But they work fantastically. Okay, so I'm going to start working on these lines that are coming off to the side. I believe that this shape is called, they call these ribs, or I think, yeah, it's called ribbed, these little lines. So I'm going to start by just drawing, you can see that I'm kind of starting just right above this furthest point, and I'm just going to go out and trace the outer edge of this pumpkin. And I'm kind of creating just this C shape. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this side. Okay. And then I'm going to do these little sections back here behind it. Each one of them kind of creates just a little, kind of like a little bubbled up kind of mound. One right behind here. And one right over here. Okay. Now I'm going to start right here at this first point. Okay. And I'm going to follow the shape of the outer line I drew. So it's also kind of creating that crescent shape. And as we get towards the center, as we're drawing these lines, you'll notice that the perspective of these lines is going to start changing. It's going to not be as fully that C shape. It's going to start getting more and more of a straight shape with a little bit of a bend. And your ridges, your little ribs, whatever you want to call them, these lines, do not worry about making them equal sizes. If you look at a pumpkin in real life, they're all over the place. You want it to be feeling kind of organic and natural, and having different size wedges here is a good thing. I'm just going to draw one more. So see how my center ones are a little smaller. This one feels a little thicker. I think that helps make it just feel a bit more true to life. And at the bottom, I'm just going to kind of round these lines connecting each of these little sections. I think I actually want it to be a bit more dramatic, so I'm just going to go over it. And then just because I like mine to be kind of clean as I work, I'm just going to go ahead and clean up these lines. Okay. I feel like this for me is maybe one of the harder parts of painting in general, is getting a good sketch just right before I start. I feel like for me, that's kind of one of my weaker points. So I'm really trying to get better at sketching these days. I've been filling out just a large sketchbook of different subjects. I'll fill out an entire page of just poppies or just this certain type of leaf, and just trying to do it without any reference, and it's really helping me. So if you feel like you're struggling with sketching, I really highly recommend doing that as a practice. And I think I mentioned it in both my other classes, but if you're struggling with your sketch, something you can do is you can hold a printed out reference, which you would have gotten in your email. You can hold it up to the window and then hold watercolor paper over it and then trace. It works especially well on sunny days, but you can do that. I've had people do that in some online or some in-person classes before. So I'm going to keep going with this sketch, almost finished. I'm just going to draw these little vines that are coming off the bottom two edges and the top. And you can just keep these super loose, super free. Just pretend like you're kind of writing some L's and E's in cursive. I'm just going to draw a little leaf coming off the top here. A couple more vines over here. And then another one over here. For this one, I'm actually going to draw this leaf. I don't want it to be actually touching my pumpkin. I'm going to have it just a little bit to the right of it. You'll see later why I don't want these two colors to bleed into each other while I'm painting. So I recommend just having a little bit of space right there. And I think we can get started with some painting, my favorite part. So I'm going to do just a little swatch of cadmium yellow. If you have a separate sheet of paper, you're welcome to do it off to the side, but I kind of, since this is just a study, I'm just going to do it on the same sheet that I'm working on. So that's just cadmium yellow. So I'm just going to draw that, see yellow for cadmium yellow, just because I like to see how the colors look on paper. They often look very different than they do on my palette because they're different colors. This palette is more of a gray and this is more of a cream. So you just never know exactly the color you're going to get till you bring it to the paper. So I'm going to get a really good big mixture of a big puddle here of cadmium yellow going on my palette. And I want it to be, just, you don't want it to be a sticky mixture. You want it to be like really flowing easily. And it flows easily when there's a good amount of water. Okay. So use the larger brush that you have, whatever that might be. Especially if you drew a larger pumpkin, you definitely want to use a large brush here because we're going to cover all of this pumpkin, okay? So just rolling it around in my paint, get all that good paint up in the bristles. I'm going to do what we call a wet on dry wash, and I'm just going to cover the entire pumpkin and the stem. And a wet on dry wash just means I'm using wet paint on the dry paper. And I'm just going to go ahead and cover all of it.
Shailene, somebody's asking, and I suppose they might not have a cadmium yellow, saying, what's the best color closest to cadmium yellow that you would suggest if they don't have that?
Yeah. I out of the colors I use, Winsor yellow or Indian yellow are both great. You could use a Areolin yellow. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Areolin yellow, yeah. Lemon yellow. You guys can use whatever yellow you have. I mean, just know that if it's a cooler yellow, it's going to turn into a slightly cooler toned pumpkin. And if it's a warmer yellow, your pumpkin's going to be warmer. And pumpkins are all colors. So whatever yellow you have, it's going to work just fine.
Somebody mentions New Gamboge too, which is a really beautiful warm color. So yeah, as Shailene says, the warm ones, you can kind of probably wing it from there.
Mm-hmm. You definitely can. I think that I don't actually, we're going to get over to burnt sienna in a few minutes here. Jimmy, do you know any good alternatives to burnt sienna. Like I would say I know how to maybe mix colors to get it, but
Yeah.
as far as getting a warmer orange tone, what do you think?
Yeah, certainly I think mixing comes into play, and that's sort of the beauty of a small set like that is I think it can
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
sometimes force you to mix, which makes some more interesting things happen. I would say, and I forget, I actually have that same set in my studio, Shailene, but
Yeah,
I forget what the red is there, the third one from the top. Is that
this
a
is cadmium red,
okay?
cadmium
Yeah.
red hue.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I mean sometimes you can take a cadmium red hue like that, and you could
Mm-hmm.
take one of your greens and kind of mix a
Mm-hmm.
complementary color, so a green and a red, and you'd knock back the intensity
Mm-hmm.
of that red and get more of a brownish tone, since they
Yeah.
would start to
And
cancel
you
each
know what?
other.
I can even when we get over to that, I'll do a quick little demonstration of how I might get to a color similar to burnt sienna. Yeah, I would maybe mix it with the green or even maybe the yellow ochre color.
Mm.
I think you just, like you said, you just want to tone down the intensity of whatever red you have whenever we get to the darker, when we get to these darker orange tones. But man, if you got burnt sienna, it's a great color to work with. It's definitely one of my all-time faves. So I'm getting to the end here. You know what? I'm just going to cover the stem as well, just for the heck of it. It's just going to give us a really warm undercolor, and I think that'll be nice. All right, so as soon as you're finished with your underwash, I'm going to do some color mixing for these greens. Just because I think, like Jimmy was saying, this is a great palette for mixing, and I always love to kind of do just some demonstrations of different colors you can get that are not just the colors that you see at face value here. So I'm going to do a mixture of sap green. Actually, I'll start by just doing a swatch. I'll do it over here. I'll do a swatch of just pure sap green, which is actually a very, very beautiful, lovely color. I use sap green in its pure form pretty frequently. It's just a nice Kermit the Frog green. So let's do some sap green here. And I'm gonna get a good mixture here going, really rubbing that color in there. Now I'm just gonna do a tiny bit of burnt sienna. Can you guys see that okay? My palette is all in focus, right? So I'm gonna do a tiny bit of burnt sienna. You can use red if that's what you have, or orange. And I'm gonna do kind of like a 60-30 or 60-40 mix, I guess, here. So it's heavier on the green. And that is just pretty faint, not a huge difference there. So that's sap green and burnt sienna. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do, hold on one second, let me close my door. So I'm going to do like a 50-50 mix here of sap green and burnt sienna. And this is going to turn into kind of like a muddy green, which is, or maybe I should say a desaturated green, because that brown kind of destroys that green a little bit, but in a really cool way. I actually love really desaturated tones like this. Okay, so that's the same. So I'm just going to do those little dashes to indicate that's the same mix, but just heavier on the burnt sienna. Now I'm going to do a mixture that is predominantly burnt sienna. And this is going to give us kind of a brown tone, which we will use later. You'll have to wait and see. And then lastly, I'm going to do just a swatch of pure burnt sienna, okay? Which is, as I said, like my favorite color ever. I love it. Okay, so that is pure burnt sienna. So I'm going to try and do just a couple of mixes here just for the heck of it. And let's see if we can get to a color that's kind of similar to burnt sienna. So we can do some cadmium red, and you can see, if you can see my palette, it's kind of hard for me to tell if you can or not. There. Okay, so you can see that that cadmium red is just like pure kind of orange tone. So my instinct is to grab a little bit of this yellow ochre. And I want to see how that looks. It might just make it might not give it as much brown as I want, but let's try it.
Shailene, before you started painting, somebody, when you were showing the brushes, somebody mentioned, oh no, my brushes are bigger than that. Thoughts on that?
I would not worry about it, because if you have a round brush at least, you should be able to get a pretty fine point there at the end. I could probably paint this whole thing with just like a size 6. Over here I have like a size 10, and I wouldn't be able to get as fine of detail with it, but I could still make it work. You could also make your, you could turn your paper and do it a larger one, where the small details wouldn't matter so much. I think the size of your brush, it's kind of one of those things that you want to think about it in scale, to scale with your artwork. Hopefully that helps. But yeah, if it's a good round brush, if it's not too old, you might know that after some time, your brushes might start looking like this if you take bad care of them like I do. But I try to do my best to make sure they maintain that nice fine point. So that right there, what did I do? That was cadmium red and yellow ochre. And I'm going to try and do that mixture of cadmium red and just a little bit of sap green. And let's see how that one turns out. So that gives it a really nice brown tone. So I'll put it right here. That's pretty close, isn't it? This might also be like a slightly heavier concentration of color, so it might look a little bit darker, but that is actually pretty similar. So try a red and green, but heavier on the red. So it's cadmium red plus sap green. Okay, so let's paint our green details. I'm going to do some sap green. I really like this color here, the second one, personally. Use whatever green you like best. It doesn't matter too much. Just whatever one, makes you happy. So I'll use actually my smaller brush here, just because I like to have it gives me a little bit more control to use a smaller brush.
And Shailene, somebody's asking thoughts on keeping and creating an even wash.
More water. Well, there's 2 ways you can do a really even wash. You can do a layer of water first, and that's what we call a wet on wet wash. So that water just does it for you. It creates a really even wash. The reason I didn't do a wet on wet wash here is I want it to dry a little bit quicker. And so I find that doing a wet on dry wash, I can get it to dry a little quicker. But the more water you have in your brush and on your little color puddle over here, the more smooth you'll find it will be. If your mix is sticky with color, it kind of gets kind of slow, then you're going to have a very uneven wash. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and start following these little vines here. These little, I guess they're vines, right? These little curly cues.
And as you do that, Shailene, somebody is saying, how do you make sure to keep the brushes, or how do you get a fine point with the brushes after painting?
After painting, do you mean like when you're? I'm confused.
I know. I think they mean so reshaping. You're done painting.
Oh, reshape. Okay. Oh, yeah.
That's what they mean.
I gotcha. Okay, so it's a lot easier than it seems. I don't think you need to buy all the brush cleaners. I don't use brush cleaners, and I've had my yeah, that's honestly really nice. I've had this sable. This is the Winsor Newton. What are these called? The Klinsky sable brushes. I've had these since I was like 20, and look at that point. Like, it's really nice. So when I really value brushes, I take better care of them. I basically just will like wash it in water, hot water, or not hot, but warm water. And then I'll just kind of form it into a point, whether I use my mouth to do that or if I just use my fingers. You can just flick it and it should keep that point, but make sure you rinse it really well after you paint. And also, this is really important, don't leave your brushes in your cups of water like that. That's how I destroyed many brushes when I was just getting started. Never leave them face down in water, okay?
And for everyone, the other brush that Shailene just showed, the black one, is a Series 7 brush. It's a definitely more expensive brush, but an investment, which is her her advice there.
I love it.
Right?
I love it.
Yeah, my little tip there too, Shailene, which is you touched upon, is I had a watercolor brush recently in my watercolor kit, and it got all jammed up in there, and I took it out, and it was terribly bent, and I just took some warm tap water in a glass, you know, fairly warm, and swished it around, and it relaxed the hairs and brought it brought it back to shape. And then yeah, somebody says makes the comment that that's what they do, and hang it with the bristles down. Yeah, you could do that, or simply wipe it off and let it sit horizontally on a paper towel.
Yes, exactly. Like, yeah. Well, you know, what's funny is I washed this one really well this morning because I wanted it to just, you know, be fresh and stuff. And as I was just, you know, activating this color here, the bristles were like all hard. Like it felt like it was like a new brush. And if I haven't used this one that much, but because I let it dry really nicely, it felt like a new brush. But there's, oh gosh, I've destroyed so many brushes over the years. And I do find that if I invest a little bit, somehow they just seem to stay a little nicer. And it's probably just because I subconsciously take better care of them. So, okay, so I'm going to, I just had to turn that around just because I didn't want to rest my palm in this as it's still drying just a little bit here. Okay, so now we're going to go over to my favorite parts. And we're going to start adding some dimension by adding some more paint layers here. So I'm going to get a very strong mix here of burnt sienna. And just so I can access it really quickly, I'll just get a nice puddle here going. Kind of similar to the one we did earlier, but this one is going to be a little bit of a heavier on the paint side. Like I want a lot of paint in this mixture here. So if you're doing mixing to get your burnt sienna color, it might take you a little bit of extra time here getting that little recipe made here. Your cadmium red and sap green or whatever you're using. But just try and get to a color that is similar to this, okay? Probably see it better if I face the light a little bit more. Okay, so using my size 3 brush, and even if your painting isn't totally dry, that's totally okay. I think it's still gonna work just fine. But mine is feeling cool, but dry. So there's still some water there, but it's not moving. And I'm just gonna trace.
Oh, sorry.
No,
somebody saying, I'm seeing my pencil lines with the lines. Is that normal?
Yes. Yes, especially if you're using a 2 pencil like I did, or a number 2 pencil. But okay, my 2 thoughts on that. First, we're going to be painting some pretty dark lines over where the pencil was. See how you can't really see the pencil markings in this one because I'm going to add dark color. Second, you should be able to erase it to some degree after your painting is totally dry. And third, bonus point is just bonus opinion, I actually don't mind seeing pencil markings. I think that that's, in my opinion, just kind of gives it some character. And, you know, you don't see pencil markings in digital art. It's only in, you know, handmade art. So I think it's kind of cool. I wouldn't worry too much about it, especially because this one is a study. As I mentioned before, you can use a different type of pencil. Like I use these F pencils, which are awesome for just a really light, it's a really light layer of pencil to begin with, and then I'm able to erase fairly easily. And also, I'm not talking about what I'm doing, I'm just going for it here. But so I did a line of color just along this outer edge, okay? And then what I did is I went back with my other brush, the size 6 round brush. I rinsed it in water, blotted it so that it just becomes a damp, clean brush. And then I use that edge to just touch that color that I dropped and slowly, gradually, naturally feather it out into this pumpkin section. And I'm just trying to create like a really soft, natural gradient from orange to, you know, this yellow tone. And I use my brush to do that. And go ahead.
And Shailene, double checking here, because someone's asking, is that the burnt sienna that you're using right now?
It is, yes.
It is, yeah.
Just
Okay.
pure burnt sienna.
Thank you.
And so if the face of your pumpkin is still a little bit wet, I think that this should end up just fine. I think that the water will probably just start to pull it over for you. But if you drop it right along here, it'll just be a little bit darker here. But I just want to show you how to do it when your painting is dry. So I'm just going to keep going along these lines, as I mentioned. So this is a size 3 brush. This is the one that has the paint. This is the painting brush, and this is the manipulating color brush. So I'm kind of using them both together. To drop a little bit extra color, if you feel like your line is really faint, one thing I like to do is just drop that color by just kind of blotting. And I'm able to leave more paint on the paper if I do that instead of just, you know, just painting it like a big stroke. Okay, and as you can see, maybe as the side is a bit more watery, that water is just starting to pull it over into that side. So I don't even really need to do anything. I love how water does that. Just takes it and does those natural, cool little movements for you. And now I'm going to manipulate it on this side by just adding that clear, damp wash. You don't want to use too much water here. I mean, you can, but I like to not use a lot because I find that the less water I use, the more control I have.
And somebody's asking, Shailene, how do you keep the lines so straight and not mess up?
As I'm painting, practice, I guess. Yeah, just trying. I mean, it helps me to rest my hand. I'll definitely say that. So if your painting is dry, you might find that it's easier to, you know, just draw that straight line. If my hand was hovering, it wouldn't be as straight. So if it helps you to turn your painting so that your hand can always kind of be on a drier surface, that might be helpful. But I'll just move slow and just try and stay as relaxed as you can. I do find that the more relaxed I am, the more straight and even my lines will be.
And someone is asking, how often do you change your water? They find that their dirty water alters their color.
It does, yeah. So I actually have two cups of water here. You can do 1 cup of clean water and 1 cup of dirty water, which is something I've taught in other classes. Because this palette is very simple, we're just using a little bit of green and mostly orange and yellow. It shouldn't be too much of an issue here. But if you would like your water to always be clean, I would recommend having a clean glass of water and a dirty. So you rinse out your dirty water and then dip your brush in the clean water. That's really helpful, especially if I'm working with a lot of colors and I want to make sure that my colors are what I want them to be. But at our house today, our neighbors had like a electrical issue, and they ended up like something to do with our well, the electric box. They had to shut it down. So right before this class, I was trying to fill up my glasses of water, and the water's off. So I had to go use our like really nice filtered water from the fridge. So it's very fresh painting. And so this part here is, it's kind of doing the same thing over and over and over, but I find it to be very relaxing and kind of soothing to just do one task and do it over and over. So dropping that color and then grabbing my damp brush and then softening out those lines. See, it's already starting to look like it has some dimension. And I can definitely still see my pencil markings. I'll probably do another layer after this one is dried because watercolor always dries lighter than you expect. So I often work in, depending on how detailed of a painting I'm creating, I might come back and do sometimes like 3 or 4 layers of color, sometimes more, sometimes less. Just depends on your style. I think that I actually probably use watercolor in a very untraditional way. I think that a lot of watercolor artists, a lot of watercolor paintings are very loose and the water kind of takes the lead. I use not as much water as when I paint, which I find gives me a little bit more control. So sometimes I'm able to make my paintings look like they're maybe more of like a colored pencil look, a little bit more illustrative and less loose.
Shailene, I just answered something, but thought maybe I'd put it out there to you as well, just your thoughts. Somebody asked, would you use soap to clean out your brushes? My thoughts on that was that soap shouldn't be necessary to clean out watercolor brushes, and that the issue could be a soap that might dry out natural hairs. Your thoughts?
Yeah, same. I think it's kind of a I think it's kind of a marketing thing for watercolors, to be honest. Maybe there's some that are specially made, but I have never found that it was necessary. I would just encourage you to be consistent to rinse them afterwards, because I mean, watercolor, like it should only, you should only need water to rinse out the color. That's kind of what the paints are, right? They wash away with water. So they work with water. It makes sense to me that that should be how that works. I have heard some people using oils on their watercolor brushes. I've never actually tried that. Jimmy, have you ever tried that? Like using like coconut oil on them, or?
No, I've not.
Yeah.
I've never, as you said, Shailene, I think you make a good point. You're using water to thin the paint, and
Mm-hmm.
simply, and it's not, it's not like, in my view, it's not like oil paint or acrylics that acrylics can tend to dry on a brush if you've made a mistake and let it do that. And
Mm-hmm.
those are not soluble
Mm-hmm.
once dry. And then of course, oil paint can kind of gunk up a brush. So yeah, water
Mm-hmm.
seems to be the trick, pretty easy.
Yeah.
No need to make it more difficult.
You guys, there's a little bug that just landed on my pumpkin. I'm gonna take that as a compliment. It thinks it's real. But I also don't want it on there. It's the ultimate compliment, right? When a bug lands on your botanical painting. Okay, so that is my first round of the burnt sienna layer. Well, actually, I need to do the back over here real quick. Don't forget about the people in the back. All right, so I'm just gonna do that same technique. Do all 3 at once, and then using my damp, clean brush, smooth that color out, create that nice gradient. Okay, so now I'm going to do that again. I think I'm actually going to really like this to be, just looking at my original reference here, I think I want it to be a little bit darker. So I'm going to add even just a tiny bit of this Sap Green, which is going to create just a little bit of a more brown tone. I do want it to be heavier on the burnt sienna side though. So get my color little puddle over here mixed. And I'll hold this up for you just in case anybody wants a closer look here. I don't know if you can tell, but I can still see my pencil markings a little bit, but I'm not too worried about it. It's kind of hard to tell over Zoom. I feel like the colors aren't really translating, but I love the way this yellow underwash is dried. I think it gives it a lot of dimension. I love to see just a couple of colors, 2 or 3 colors, and just something that you think of as just one color, right? You think of a pumpkin as orange, but in reality, there'll be many other colors. So I'm going to do the same technique, just drop in this strong pigment mix here. This over here, this mixture is moving very slowly, okay? Which tells me that there's a lot of pigments in that mixture, okay? If it was moving really easily, like water, I would know that it'd be a more watered down, more transparent layer of color. But the slower the paint moves, the more paint there is in it, so. And I will keep doing my same technique here. I don't want those lines to be too just drawn on there. I want it to feel really soft, nice gradient. And I'm relieved to see that I'm probably not going to go over on this class. My last 2 classes, I took way too long. So this is probably a good pace, huh? You might accidentally do what I do sometimes and accidentally grab the paint with the brush that I'm using to smooth things out. It happens. And as we're doing this, let's go ahead and drop a little bit of color down here at the bottom, just so it kind of creates that impression that this pumpkin is round and that the bottom is, starting to go, as it turns under, it should be a little bit darker because it's creating a shadow there. If you want to drop a lot of color, remember that little trick I showed you? You can just blot the color. You can drop it instead of brushing it on. You'll leave a lot more color on your paper. Okay. Smooth out just a few of these lines. They're looking a little bit painted on, a little bit kind of not organic. Just want it to feel really natural, really smooth. Okay, and now I'm going to mix a dark color for our stem. So I think I'm gonna do a variety of what I did here, which was kind of in the middle of this gradient as we were going from sap green to burnt sienna. So I'm gonna do burnt sienna with some sap green, but it's just gonna be a really strong mixture kind of both of them. And that should just give you a nice brown color. If you don't feel confident about mixing, you can always just grab a brown that you already have, or yeah, red and green should do the trick though. And I am going to just go ahead and cover all of this.
And Shailene, we've got another question here. We might have to kind of parse out just a little bit. I think I understand it. It says, do you think your layers can be too light? You can build and build, but sometimes can't easily take them away. This also increases your time spent and chance for error. So what do you think about layers and how light to dark you're moving?
I prefer to build slowly and just with a lot of patience, because I do find that if I go too dark too quickly, which is possible, like, I mean, this is a pretty dark layer I just painted, and I dropped the color. But I think that if I go too dark too quickly, sometimes I'll find that the paint seeps into the paper in a way that I'm not able to lift it out. So I like to work very slowly and gradually kind of build up that form. Sometimes I'll drop color dark. I hope that answers that question. What do you think, Jimmy?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'll note too, for this person who says that sometimes you can't easily take them away. If you were to be on the Winsor and Newton website and you were looking at, if you clicked on the individual color swatches, it would bring details up about the colors, and it'll have a little ST designation, ST, the letters ST, if it's a staining color. So some colors, specifically due to their pigments, are more powerful and more staining. For instance, for everyone would be colors by the name of phthalocyanine. So phthalocyanine colors are really strong, and if you
Right there's a
heavy with them,
color.
it's hard to lift.
Yeah. Yeah, so I like to work with more transparent kinds of watercolors, because I love how they can kind of shine out from underneath. Like you could paint a layer of yellow and then you could paint a layer of green over that, and the yellow will still be underneath, kind of shining through and creating just that warmer feel. So as you can see here, I'm just adding some kind of last dark layer, a last layer of dark color, and just to kind of some spots where I feel like I could use just a little touch of drama, a little bit extra contrast. I'm actually going to go back here behind the pumpkin because I think I've kind of neglected these little ridges back here. So this is my mixture of burnt sienna with a tiny bit of green in it. It's kind of getting watered down as I keep working here, but that is what this mixture is.
And I want to let everyone know, I did put in the chat, but if you want to follow Shailene on Instagram, if anyone is on Instagram, you can do that at Shailene Louise. Michael's can also be followed on Instagram at Michael's Stores. And then likewise, Winsor and Newton on Instagram is simply at Winsor and Newton.
And I also have some, I might have already mentioned this, I can't remember, but I have quite a few other tutorials that are free on my YouTube channel at Shailene Louise, or YouTube/Shailene Louise. One class specifically, I do kind of go over the technique of, I'll actually show you. So you notice how these ridges kind of create almost like a bubbled effect. I was working on a geranium leaf, which has a very similar technique. You can see that within all these, these little sections here, the edges are a bit darker, and I maintain a lighter center, which is a similar technique to what we did here. We had darker edges while maintaining that lighter yellow center. So I have a class on that, just painting that. It's a real simple one. Here's another example of, seeing it in a different setting. I think is kind of interesting, a different type of painting. So what are these called? Anthurium lace leaf, I believe is what this is called. And we have that same technique of kind of those darker edges while maintaining a lighter center. Something I would note about a painting like this, which this one took me probably many hours, but within this painting, you see it probably just as pink, right? But I use quite a bit of yellow and purple, which are opposite colors, which I feel like gives paintings, especially botanicals, just a more lifelike kind of appearance. When you look at paintings in real life, when you look at plants in real life, you'll see that there's so many colors. so many more than you just take in on your first glance. Just checking in on how this is all drying. I want to make sure I don't have any hard water lines. You can see right here that I have, see how these lines are just drying a little bit hard. I love that look sometimes, but not today. I like to kind of keep everything really smooth. So I'm going to do one more layer of my stem, which is looking just a little brown. I want it to be a little stronger. So another mixture of burnt sienna with sap green. I want this mixture here to be really slow like molasses, because that way I know there's a lot of color in there. I'm telling you, watercolor always dries lighter than I expect. All right, I'm gonna drop that real dark mixture here in this stem. And that is feeling pretty good to me. If you want to make your painting really fancy, you could do more leaves, you could draw a shadow underneath, you could draw, you know, you could do more with like playing with where the light is. I kind of just kept this one simple, you know, there's just a little bit of a shadow underneath, but maybe if you wanted to pretend the light was coming from over here, you know, these sides could be a bit more shadowed, under here would be a bit more shadowed, maybe you'd have a shadow over here. Sorry, I keep saying things I want to change. I'm like, that needs more color. So that's like the end, I don't know, I feel like the end stages of the painting are fun because then I can kind of just look at it from a distance and see what little spots need more detail. Just bring it to life.
And Shailene, somebody asked, how long can you keep working on this? Can I keep adding layers and blending, or is it too late once it dries?
Oh yeah, you can keep adding layers after it dries, definitely. I mean, I work on paintings for sometimes months. And you can actually usually activate the color too, even after a painting seems like it's dried. Usually when you bring water to the paper and there's paint there, if you kind of rub the edge with water, you're gonna find that that color is like, hello, I'm ready to move again. But not always. If I do this kind of, well, it's not too complicated, but if I do a wet on wet wash, that color I find stays really well. When I just layer the color on a dry paper, that paint sits on top and I'm able to keep moving it a little bit more easily, which maybe it's a good thing, maybe it's a bad thing. I think that when I'm working on really detailed paintings, I want the color to really sit where I put it. So I will do more wet on wet layers, if that makes sense. So let me see here. What else can I show you? Oh, yeah. I have this one here, which this was so much fun to work on. But as you can see, like, gosh, leaves there's so many different types of plants and botanicals and looks to things like these basil leaves. Look how similar of a technique they are to this pumpkin because they have that kind of bubbled up effect, whereas the mint, kind of similar, but not really. What are these ones? Rosemary? They're also different. So there's just so many different techniques you can use to get the look you want. So yeah, I think this one's feeling pretty good. Let's see if there's anything else I can show you that's fun. Oh yeah, been working on potential future sunflower tutorials, which may or may not be coming down the pipe. That could be fun. But yeah, this was so much fun. I hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know if there's any more questions. I think we have a couple minutes left here.
I don't see any coming in at the moment, Shailene, but just a lot of nice comments about thanks for the clear instruction and the inspiration. Yay. And yeah, all nice things about that. So it's always good to hear, of course. And yeah, awesome. If anyone has any questions, we do have about 5 minutes left. So fire away, and either Shailene or if I can help as well, we're happy to do it.
Happy to help. And yeah, you can see that as this painting is like dry, I'm still able very easily to just touch that color with paint and just move it around. pretty wild. Watercolor is, I think a lot of people talk about watercolor like it's the big scary, not a lot of people, but I've heard people talk about watercolor like it's really intimidating. But I think it's amazing because you're able to keep manipulating that color even after the painting is dried. I think the trick is working slowly. Don't go too dark because, you know, it might seep into the paper. It might be really hard to lift. I mean, like if I were to just like really drop some dark color on here and it really dried, I would only be able to lift it out so much. Like it's still going to be there, but you know, you can lift it to some degree.
And Shailene, somebody's asking, they noticed that sometimes when you're mixing and you're putting your brush into the pans, into the half pans, you may not have cleaned it off all the way. And does that make the half pans muddy?
Busted. Yeah, yeah, it does.
That's funny.
You guys, I'm like the most like not type A painter. I'm gonna show you guys my, you're gonna get a kick out of this. I'm gonna show you my everyday use watercolor palette, and some of y'all might freak out if you're more type A, but it's just a complete mess. And I love it. Like I'm not, yeah, how do I say this? I'm not super concerned about getting like, I only want sap green for these leaves. You know, I'll usually just use what's there and kind of activate that color and then grab a little bit of yellow, but that's only because my style of painting, I'm not worried about colors being like super, super bold and bright. I do like them to be a little bit more desaturated. So if you want your paintings to be very vibrant, very, you know, pure colors, you probably want to clean yours off a little bit more than I do, but I think it's fun. I like for it to be a little messy. But my goodness, yeah, to me, this is actually very clean. I've used a few of the other Cotman kits in the past. I started off with this one, then I went up to the one that has maybe 20 paints, 24 paints. And then I believe there's one with like 48 colors, right? It's like that big old one.
Yeah, there's definitely some bigger ones, and
Somebody
else
yeah.
Also mentioned today what they were doing is they were using the watercolor, but they were using it on canvas and having a hard time. So for whomever that is, yeah, your watercolor paper is meant to be the proper absorbency to withstand watercolor, to take it in, to be able to also manipulate it and fix things. Whereas a canvas doesn't have that kind of absorbency and is really meant for acrylics or oils. So that's why you would be having that issue.
Yeah, that's tricky. There are canvases that are designed for watercolor paints. I've used some in the past, but to be honest, nothing compares to watercolor paper. Yeah, once you get really used to the feel of watercolor paper, trying to use it with anything else is kind of a nightmare. I remember one time I had a really big commission. It was one of my biggest commissions I've ever done. It was on a huge, like it was a 30 by 22 sheet of what I thought was watercolor paper. And I spent 2 days sketching out this, you know, meticulous design. It was like a really florally, you know, very detailed piece. And then when I went to start painting, I realized that the paper must have been made for oils and I just grabbed the wrong one. But it was so hard to work with. Like the paint wouldn't move. As soon as I laid it down, I wasn't able to just keep, you know, like the technique I did here where I laid down color and then used the brush to smooth out the water and kind of feather it out. I could not do that. And it was a huge, there was a huge deadline for that painting. So it was very stressful.
Yeah, I know what you're referring to, Shailene, and yeah, it just does not want to move on that. I would also just say for everyone too, you're using the Cotman set, which is the student grade watercolors from Winsor & Newton, and they're very good. And maybe you can weigh in on this as well. But my feeling has always been that if any of you are, wallet conscious, and who isn't as artists, right? That to me, using these student grade watercolors, but really investing your money in the best quality paper is probably one of the things that'll help you, because a really good quality paper can withstand the corrections that you might want to make and won't buckle as much if you have the right weight, and can kind of make the process easier.
100%, 100% agreed. Yeah. Paper to me is the big one. It needs to, it needs to take and honestly, brushes too. I think for me, like it's probably brush, paper, paints. Because yeah, these ones are technically not as, how would you say this, Jimmy? Like they're not as high of a
Yeah.
concentration as like the
Yeah.
professional series, but you can still work on layers. Like I can get the colors I want out of
Yeah.
this, no problem.
Yeah,
But yeah, I
absolutely.
need
The
right
simple,
tools.
yeah, the simple way to put that for everyone, just a quick, very, very quick abridged professional versus student colors is your professional range is going to have more of a pigment load. So the pigment, the powdered color that goes into the paint making process is often the most expensive part of making paint. So if you put a little bit less of a pigment load in student grade, it can be offered to you at a more reasonable price. And then the other thing is in a professional range, you're going to have just more colors. So you might have, I want to say it's about 120 colors in the professional range from Winsor and Newton, and the student range is going to have less. And then finally, the last thing is your professional range might have a genuine cadmium or genuine cobalt color, where the student range will have a hue, which tries to approximate that without the more expensive pigment. But I have both in my studio, and the student grade stuff from Winsor Newton works really, really well. So I'm in agreement with you, Shailene. If you have a brush that is kind of wonky, hard to get those really nice, beautiful, precise lines that you have there if
Yes.
the brush wants to go every which way.
Yes, for sure. I've experimented with a little bit with oils this past year, and I feel like oil brushes such a different feel because they are not about, like, there's not a value, I guess, for oil brushes is that nice fine point. Maybe in some, maybe I bought cheap ones, I don't know, but it's so hard for me to work with a medium if I don't have that nice point. I'm so used to it with watercolors. It's very important.
Yeah, I agree with you. I feel like we could do a whole Q&A just on that right
I
now.
know,
But
I know.
I think we're up against I think we're up against the clock here. And yeah,
Yeah,
just a
yeah,
lot of great comments, and a lot of everybody super happy to hear from you, Shailene. So thanks so much. It was a real
yeah.
pleasure moderating for you.
Look it, she's holding up the pumpkin.
Oh,
This
there
is
you
so
go.
cool. Oh, I love it. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This was seriously so fun.
Awesome.
So
Thanks
if
everybody.
please,
And
please share them on social media too, because I love to see them all come through.
yeah,
So
awesome. Thanks, Shailene. So happy to
thank you
have
guys.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Mwah. Bye.